In this short video, I'll first provide factual information about the Pauline corpus, then I'll speak about the function of Paul's letters and the importance of their opening section. Hello, I'm Jean-Francois and I sit here in the chair of wisdom to speak about Paul, the letter writer. This presentation isn't going to be the most intellectually challenging section of our course since it provides factual information. Yet we need this information to go ahead. First, let's consider the order of Paul's letters in our editions of the New Testament. As we may realize, there's a certain logic to this order. We can perceive two groups of letters in the Pauline corpus. The first group lists the letters addressed to communities, the Romans, the Corinthians, etc. The second group contains those sent to individuals, Philemon, Timothy, etc. Each group lists the letter in order of length, from the longest to the shortest. For this reason, nothing in that order tells us that 1 Corinthians was written before 2 Corinthians. What about the letter to the Hebrews? It's placed at the end of the collection despite being long and addressed to a group. Early on, Christians considered that Paul had little connection with Hebrews and therefore placed it at the end of the collection as an appendix. New Testament scholars have created other classifications among Paul's letters. For instance, you may hear of the undisputed letters. As the phrase indicates, there's a consensus among scholars about Paul's involvement in these letters. The undisputed letters are Romans, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. You may also hear about the dubious letters, that is, the letters from which there's a debate about the degree of Paul's involvement in their composition. Even if their origin is dubious, these letters are part of the canon and considered to be scripture. Finally, other documents are considered to be pseudepigraphic or spurious. Early on, Christians assumed that Paul had little or no connection with these documents. In this group, we find 3 Corinthians, the letter to the Laodiceans, the correspondence between Paul and Seneca, and the Apocalypse of Paul. Paul's letters are the earliest Christian literature which has reached us. The letters could fulfill various purposes, but all these letters substitute for Paul's presence. Passage in 1 Thessalonians and Galatians explicitly refer to this function of the letters. More broadly, writing letters allow Paul to keep in touch with communities, to give news, and to speak of his projects. The letters address questions submitted by communities, as is evident in 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians. They also complete Paul's oral teaching. In other cases, a letter attempts to solve a crisis. Galatians and 2 Corinthians are examples of this function. Paul also writes letters of recommendation. The whole letter to Philemon and the last chapter of Romans also serve this purpose. Finally, Paul's most extended letter, that is Romans, is a self-introduction to people he's never met and from whom he expects some support. Since the Reformation, Christians have often perceived Paul's letters as a storehouse of doctrine. As a result, many faithful view them as dry theological tractates, far less appealing than the narrative sections of the New Testament. The liturgical cutout accentuates their dryness. When he published in 1908 his work Licht vom Osten, Light from Ancient East, Adolf Deismann made a bold suggestion. After studying all sorts of Greco-Roman letters, Deismann claimed that we should consider Paul's letters as letters, composed according to the literary conventions of his time and hence as documents that represent parts of conversations between two parties. Beside the chapter in Michael Gorman's book, the chapter by Jerome Murphy O'Connor will inform you about the practical aspects of writing letters in Greco-Roman antiquity. In terms of literary organization, Greco-Roman letters used stereotypes formulas as is still the case today for letters in most societies. Typically, the introduction included the following items: sender, addressee, and greeting. The body also opened with standard formulas. The conclusion usually included greetings, often to acquaintances other than the addressees, a final salutation, and a date. Paul used these conventions and slightly modified them, for instance by inserting a thanksgiving after the greeting and by having long sections of moral advice in the last third of several letters. Since readers often view Paul's letters as theological tractates, they tend to overlook the introductory paragraphs of Paul's letters as if there wasn't much to learn from them. On the opposite, introductions provide rich information about the tone and contents of the letter depending on the presence, absence, or length of some elements of the structure. The prayer and the thanksgiving tell us something about the state of the relationship between Paul and the group or person to whom the letter is addressed. It can also let us know about the main topics. For instance, the thanksgiving of 1 Corinthians almost reads like the table of contents of the whole letter. You'll be doing a short exercise about the opening of Paul's letters to get a sense of the kind of information that you can glean from them. To get a sense of letter writing during the Greco-Roman period, read some of the letters from antiquity. Almost all these letters originate from ancient city dumps in Egypt. They give us a snapshot of daily life in Egypt at this period.